for some who may not be familiar, tell us, who was Anne Frank? What does the world know about Anne Frank?
Anne Frank is really the most famous, most touching story that came out of World War II and the Holocaust. Anne Frank was born in Germany to Jewish parents. And when Hitler took over in Germany, thankfully her dad had plans to support and to protect his family. They moved to Amsterdam. He was a very successful businessman. And as Hitler's tentacles began to reach into Holland, he had already set up an annex, a place for the family to hide. And when his older daughter, Margot, was called up, they went into hiding, and they were hiding for 2 years. Right before they went into hiding, they gave Anne Frank a diary on her 13th birthday. And it's because of that diary, it's because of Anne Frank that we know what a lot of Jewish people and a lot of people who are victims of Adolf Hitler went through just to survive. And her story has touched the hearts of this world for generations.
And the diary, just ends abruptly, just ends. And what did you find in your research for your book? And I was mesmerized by what you've written here, writing, just explain the process you went through to research and write the lost diary of Anne Frank.
Well, thank you. You know, we see the diary end, and, you know, like anyone who's ever read that diary, we want to know what happens next. We want to follow Anne through the next chapters of her life, which were tragic, but we weren't able to. She wasn't able to take a pen and a paper or a diary with her. And so what I set out to do is to research what Anne went through from the day she was arrested. What happened? How did they find out where they were hiding? Where did they go after they were arrested? What was Westerbork like, which was like a transit camp? What was it like for her in Auschwitz and then Bergen-Belsen? So I traveled to all these places. I interviewed eyewitnesses and survivors. This book follows the facts as best we can, but I write it in first person. I write it as if Anne continued with her diary because I want us to feel the emotions of it. And I shared with y'all, I made 3 trips to Auschwitz where I studied. And that trip to Auschwitz, that third trip, I would go into the Auschwitz camp. I would walk through very prayerfully, just really trying to grasp the weight of that place. And I got there when the thing opened on that third trip the first day. And I followed everything that I could. I walked through it. I read everything. I would sit and contemplate. And I got to the very back of the camp where the crematorium was. And I sat there and I just prayed and reflected on Anne Frank and so many. Well, I realized it was getting dark. I had been there all day. And I thought, man, I better get out of here. I better leave before they close. Well, as I headed back, I found that nobody was there. Everybody had left. I'd been so enamored by what was going on in that place, what Anne faced, that I completely lost track of time. So I hurried back to the front gate, that infamous gate where you'd enter, and I was locked in. And no one was around. I pounded on the guard door of the tower, the guard tower, hoping that someone would be there. No one answered. It got dark. I began to walk the perimeter of Auschwitz, trying to find a way out. I couldn't find a way out. My heart was beating. I was fretful, and I knew I wasn't in 1944. I wasn't there with Nazis, but the fear that I felt really kind of took me back. And so I circled around and went back to the guard tower. I saw a light at the guard tower, began to bang on that door again, praying, Lord, please let someone let me out. And by God's grace, I heard the heavy boots of a Polish guard walking down out of that tower. Obviously, it was a place where he would stay the night. And he didn't speak English. I didn't speak Polish, but he let me out. And it was really then that I thought, man, we have got to reflect what Anne Frank and millions face like her. So that's really what really pushed me to write this book.
Wow, what an experience, my goodness. And as you write this and as I was reading this, you get drawn into what was going on and the horrific nature of it. But let me ask you, what do you speculate some in the book about her wrestling with God? And she says that so many people that were in there they turned their back on God, became atheists. What did you find out about Anne or speculate about Anne and her relationship to God?
Well, the great thing is Otto and Edith Frank, her parents, had a strong commitment to God. They were a Jewish family. They weren't as active in the synagogue as perhaps they wish they would have been. But Otto, Frank, and Edith prayed with their children every day. They discussed God's word every day. And Otto Frank even broached the subject of Jesus with his children. And he wanted, before they went into hiding, he had wanted to get them the New Testament so they could learn about Jesus. And so he set a foundation in Anne Frank's life. And even in her diary that you read, you hear her reference God, and you hear about her dreams about her friend Hanelli. And so that clearly carried on into Westerbork, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen. Eyewitnesses and survivors spoke a little bit about of course, they didn't know Anne Frank would be anybody famous. They didn't realize she would impact our world. But just a brief grasp of some of them was her understanding that man is depraved, that man is sinful, that man brings harm, that God brings good, that God brings life, that God carries us through. And so that was prevalent in Anne's last few months of life. And I wanted that to be represented. Where others left God in the Holocaust, I believe firmly Anne drew closer to his wings, trusting him not just with her daily bread, but trusting him to take her when life ended. I was transformed by the study of her life. A lot of things kind of came to the surface for me. One is she had these animosities towards her mom. They were petty. And once she got into the concentration camp, she started looking at people not for their little negatives. She began to see the beauty of her mom and her dad and her sister. So I believe firmly one of the things that I found in my own life, it's so easy to deal with the petty and forget to look at people for who they really are. And every one of us, God has placed himself, we are created in his image. And when we look at people, we can see his image. I think the other thing that kind of came to mind was that we treasure so many things and they're just stuff. And when someone like a Jewish person in the Holocaust, I mean, I'm sitting in my study right now. I've got awards, I got family pictures, I got all these things that I treasure. But when someone is yanked out of their house and thrown in a concentration camp, all they have is their being and their relationship with God. And it's really made me take things a lot less serious, focus on what really matters. And those are just two that really have impacted me.